people on the job. So each becomes training for a democratic participation in the other. We haven't done that, and we keep wondering why people don't give a shit, don't bother to vote, don't bother to learn about it, haven't the time, haven't the interest, who can give you the detailed information about how every player on some baseball team has hit for the last 20 years, but can't tell you who the name of the local councilman is, whose impact on their lives is 50 times greater than anything that happens on the ball field. Right? What is that? What is that? That's a crazy society that keeps wondering how to have democracy when the answer is we never allowed economic democracy. That's all I'm arguing for. I'm arguing for economic democracy. So, does Mondragon, for those of you not familiar, Mondragon is a experiment started about 50 some odd years ago by a priest in northern Spain, in the area of Spain just below the Pyrenees Mountains, Basque area. Arizmendi was his name, Father Arizmendi. And he, in an area of desperate long-term unemployment, if you know the political situation in Spain, these are a special group of people. They're perpetually at war with the Spanish government and all the rest. And they had terrible unemployment. And he started self-employment, workers forming what we in this country would have probably called co-ops, but collective workers who did roughly what I'm describing. And here we are 50 years later. There are now roughly 100,000 workers in northern Spain who are in the Mondragon thing, which is now spread to dozens or maybe even hundreds of enterprises working more or less in this way. I use the words more or less advisedly because it's not exactly what I've described, but it's getting there. But it's an interesting example of an experiment in a radical different thing that has been extremely successful, extremely popular. Nobody dares mess with them. The Spanish government long ago lets them do basically whatever they want. They're big enough now to control the political life in those areas as well as the economic foundation. They now produce for buyers all over Europe. They could export, they don't just produce locally. So it's very interesting, and not the least of it is, it's an alternative way of understanding what a radical, Arizmendi was a radical worker priest, part of that wing of the Catholic Church, leftist, very influenced by Marx and by the anarchist tradition also in Spain, which is strong in that country. But his idea was, this is an alternative. We don't want to be a labor union. We don't want to bargain with the employer for better conditions. We want to get rid of the employer. It's a little bit like this struggle against slavery in the United States. Remember? 19th century. There were two kinds of people who didn't like slavery. Two kinds of people. One kind who said it's terrible how the slaves are getting treated down there in the South. They should be better fed, they should be better clothed, they shouldn't be torn apart from their families. And then there were other people who said, what the hell are you talking about? The problem isn't that the slave should be in a better condition. The problem is he's a slave. You got to get rid of slavery. That's always been my definition of what a revolutionary capitalism is. Our job is not to get workers higher wages or better benefits. The problem is they're proletarians. They should be in charge. What is this? Improving the condition of the oppressed? No, you get rid of their oppression, which is the only guarantee that those conditions will not go back to the awfulness they were last month or last year. Here's an interesting thing, and one of the few hopeful things I can point to you at. One of the largest unions in the United States, the United Steelworkers of America, still a large union in this country, made an amazing statement last year. It announced, only union in this country to do that, it announced a formal alliance between itself and the Mondragon communities. And the head of the Steelworkers Union, somebody help me remember? Leo Gerard, made an amazing statement. He said, you know, given where, I didn't use these words, but this is the substance. Given where capitalism is in the United States and given where the labor movement is, we can no longer have just one strategy, namely fighting for better conditions for workers, better wages, better benefits, all that. We have to operate on two tracks. Yes, we will fight for better conditions for workers, but we are also interested in beginning a movement in the United States using an alliance with Mondragon so that a program for both unemployed workers and new people entering the labor force, that we will have something as a movement to offer them that's radically different from the employer-employee relationship, another way to think about their job lives, their careers, their futures. That was an amazing thing for an American union to admit. And I wish I could tell you all kinds of things have happened since that statement was released. They haven't, or at least I'm not aware of them. But I don't dismiss this as a remarkable recognition here in the United States that a whole new way of thinking about what a left and what an active labor movement is going to do. But if I were talking to people who were active in leftist organizations, which I know some of you are, then I would say something like this, a dramatic new image that working people would begin to understand a revolutionary process as being something that's going to radically alter their work lives, those of their husbands, their wives, their children, in a new way that is exciting and gives them a hope for a new life. We have to do that because the old image of a socialized property and planning, for a whole host of reasons, is not going to be able to inspire and motivate the next generation. We see it. It's not sufficient. It may be necessary, but it is not sufficient. And this is one way to conceptualize an image that comes out of the Marxian tradition. And let me stress to you that it does. Because what I'm saying could be re-articulated as follows for those of you that are familiar. The name of the game is to change production so that the people who produce the surplus are the ones who receive it and distribute it. No longer the capitalist arrangement in which one group of people produce the surplus and a different group of people get it. In that split, you have in the core of your production system opposition, contradiction, and conflict. You see it sometimes when the workers walk out and carry picket signs. You see it quietly in sabotage. But it's always there, and it always shapes what goes on. The overcoming of that contradiction is what I'm talking about. And that is achieved if the people who produce the surplus are the same people who get it and who distribute it and who decide how to shape society with it. We now have the mass of us producing surplus that a tiny minority gets and distributes and shapes society to keep them in that position. And we're in the peculiar place of kind of not wanting to face it because it makes us what we are. And it's sometimes hard to face. Sir?
Is this perspective also the reason why you talked about corporations and rich people, poor people, and not, for instance, about ideas like the Tobin tax, to give it international dimension of the tax issue? And we had, this political force called attack, which was a bit silent in the last crisis, from my perspective. But did you deliberately not focus on that because it's about taxing finance and not bringing it down to this perspective?
Yes. Okay. If I had more time, if we had a fuller conversation, sure. But I come from a tradition in which singling out one part of the capitalist system as the target for our anger is a tactical, strategic, and theoretical mistake. The issue here in this country, I think, and I think it's true in Europe as well, is finally to overcome the last 50 years of hesitance to talk about capitalism as a system and as the problem that needs to be overcome. It's much easier to talk, for example, many of my colleagues in the economics profession are writing and obsessing about finance, the financial industry, financialization. I mean, look at the titles of the books and the articles. This is, to my way of thinking, not that I'm against analyzing finance. Of course we should be analyzing all industries, finance included. But this focus is a very old focus that Marx himself, in the third volume of Capital, has a field day making fun of this. Why are we selecting the bankers or the investment bank? What is this? They do what they do to make money in the system according to the rules by which it functions. The problem in the United States was the same on Main Street as on Wall Street. This fetishization of Goldman Sachs or somebody else as the bad guy distracts one from the need to talk about a system. Everybody plays to make it in this system. They play by the rules as best they understand them, or they get around the rules as best they can. But the problem is that set of rules Otherwise, we're going to get angry at the banker, punish them, throw them in jail. The next rung of leaders will spring up, and they're going to do the same thing because the system imposes that on people. It makes you do this and that. That's why the same guy who's an asshole in his job is a really nice husband and really takes good care of his dog. What's it got to do with anything? What he does on the job is given to him by a set of circumstances. So a Tobin tax, that's a tax on financial transactions. The idea was, if you make every financial transaction more expensive by attaching a tax to it, there won't be the crazy speculation, because basically by not taxing these transactions, you're subsidizing this kind of speculative activity. Sure, why not? I'm in favor of taxation on alcohol and cigarettes too, because they're not good for you. But this is not my issue. I don't want us to be angry at finance instead of non-finance. What? Strikes me as craziness. It's like being angry at Nebraska instead of, Oklahoma. What? These are parts of a system. And what's needed in this country is not anger at bankers. We have a long, if you don't know American history, we have a long tradition of ferocious anger at bankers. I mean, half of what that Tea Party is, not to be mean-spirited, but half of that Tea Party has a long history of being angry at bankers, because bankers for them is a synonym for New Yorkers, Jews, foreigners, and a whole set of other phantoms in their iconography of evil. So communists, anarchists, socialists, Marxists, terrorists, Muslims, all synonyms in the minds of those who are looking. I don't want any, we need not to get anywhere near that. We have to, we the left, I think, have to introduce the critique of the system. You're not going to fix this system unless you deal with it as a system and begin to ask the question. There are parts of this new political party in Germany, I can't hear your accent for sure, but is it?
Yeah.
Okay. There's a new party in Germany, some of you heard me talk about it, called Die Linke. It's a very important party. It is a party, a good number of whose members, not all, there are a lot of divisions, which are very intense these days, but they have a lot of division, but they include people who use the following slogan: Germany can do better than capitalism. That's the slogan I would propose for this country. We can do better than capitalism. And let's open a debate as to what the hell that means, and where that goes, and what's at stake in all of that. I do believe, to end on a perhaps slightly more positive note,